Uh, First, group thank you to Libby. These have been very fun, and especially in the time we're living. And I think we all appreciate what you have done for us. And the poem you read is particularly appropriate. I wanted to start by the theme putting this together is that quoting the great American philosopher Yogi Berra, if you don't know who Yogi was, ask Glenn Cook. And Yogi was driving one day, it is said, and his wife Carmen said, "We're lost." And Yogi, of course, replied, "But we're making good time." And I think that's a good summary of what I'm going to tell you about. Been lost for decades, but seem to be making good time. My grandparents were immigrants from the Ukraine. My mother's family came probably in about 1910, and my father's family came in probably about 1920. My mother was born here. My father was born in the Ukraine, came here with his parents as a child, became a citizen, and they met and married. And the interesting one of this group was my father's father, who played the French horn well, it is said, and in the Ukraine played in classical orchestras and opera orchestras. And my grandmother used to tell me about sitting backstage during the operas and listening and enjoying the action on stage. I was the first grandchild, and that comes with privileges and work. Originally, my grandfather had after they came, he was in the Baltimore Symphony. Whole family lived in Baltimore, and was first chair French horn. We don't know why that stopped. By the time I was old enough to be aware of what was going on, he was running a small neighborhood grocery, and as the firstborn, as a boy, I got to work there. Eventually, my father took over that store, and most of my childhood memories are of him running the store. When I was 13, something happened, and I got a camera as a gift. And from that camera to where I am sitting right here is a straight line. Basically, since age 13, I've had really no choice into what I was doing. We had very little money. I had this camera. I was doing odd jobs. I could pick up a little money, but I certainly couldn't afford film and having the film processed. So I learned to do the photographic processing myself. I do not remember how I learned it. I read a lot, and I assumed that that's how I got it. And back then, you could buy the chemicals for processing Kodak film easily. So I set up part of my parents' basement. I moved a curtain across it so it was dark, and set up my dark room. Learned to mix up the chemicals, process the film, and did contact prints. What I did not realize is that as I was making up these reagent solutions, I would be doing it for about the next 50 years, but not in the basement. So I carried on with that, went through the public school system. Don't remember very much about it until I got to the 12th grade. In 12th grade, we had chemistry, and I loved it. It's the only course I remember in all of high school. I thought this was just great. He talked about chemicals whose names I knew from the photographic processing I was doing. We learned about atoms and all the periodic table and chemical bonding, and I thought this was just great. 12th grade. To start early in the school year, our chemistry teacher mentioned that Baltimore was starting something that, remember, we're still post-war, and we all know what war that was. The country was trying to get kids interested in science, and there was a program nationally, and Baltimore was just going to start it. It was called the Science Fair. So he said, who would like to do a research project for the Science Fair? Yeah! So, had to pick a project. I don't remember how that came about. Project was really to do a chemical analysis of the organs of a mouse. I do not remember where the mouse came from. I do not remember how the mouse died. I do remember who dissected the mouse, and I do remember who figured out the chemistry to do all the chemical analysis. And I did that. And in the spring, I put together a display and took it downtown where they were having the first Baltimore Science Fair. And came in first. One of the rewards for coming in first is they sent you to the National Science Fair, which was in Tulsa. 2-day train ride. We're talking 1956. You did not fly. So went out to Tulsa to the National and got a 4th prize and came home. 2 days. And being kind of lazy, I decided to cut school. And I had just come home from the National. And so I had cut school that day and was laying on the sofa. Turns out that day, my sister got sick and my mother called the pediatrician. Back then, you didn't go to the doctor's office. The doctor came to you, made house calls. The pediatrician arrives. He had treated me my whole life. He was my pediatrician as well. And he walks in the door and he sees me laying on the sofa and he says, "You bum, why aren't you in school?" So I explained to him about the science fair and how I had just gotten back and that I was tired and was taking the day off of school. And so he asked the question that we all ask high school seniors: what are you doing in the fall? Now, we had very little money. There was no chance of my folks giving me money towards an education. And I knew that if I was going to go to university, I would have to earn tuition. So I told him, our pediatrician, that I had been admitted to the University of Maryland, but that was too far away. It was 40 miles. I couldn't go back and forth every day and still hold down a job that I could earn tuition. So that wasn't very good. Maryland's pharmacy school was in Baltimore. I'd been admitted there. And that was pretty good because that was kind of like a work study. They would make sure you had a job and I'd be able to make tuition. The only problem with that is I really wasn't interested in being a pharmacist, but at least I could go to school. And the third option was something I hadn't really thought about because I couldn't afford it. And that was a school across town called Johns Hopkins. And tuition there was $800 a year. And that was it. It would be today it's 60,000. But there's no way to make it, to work and make it. And our pediatrician looked at me and said, you're going to Hopkins and you're going to work your way through, and I'll get a job for you, and I'll call you next week and let you know the details. And then he went to take care of my sister. And so I went to Hopkins. And my first year I washed dishes in a biochemistry lab and learned a lot of biochemistry. I absolutely loved Hopkins. I just loved every course. There was all the science I could ever want, and you could take as much as you want. It was just great, just great. And I got to do some research, earned a little bit of money. I earned the first year's tuition. After that, there were fellowships, and I was able to use the money. I bought a car for $250. Comes in important. Pretty much had a ball. Couldn't take enough science courses. Got to know Allison Wilder's brother, who was a graduate student there at the time. Probably about my junior year, a friend says to me, I'm dating a nursing student and she's got a friend nursing student, and would you like to double date with us? Now, he probably asked because I had a car and he didn't, but I told you the car was important because that's how I met Sandy, right?
Right.
A usually reliable source. And that seems to have worked out. Finished up at Hopkins. Hopkins had developed a program in biophysics during that time, and it was all graduate. And I had pretty much taken most of those graduate biophysics courses. So I decided I'd go to graduate school in biophysics, and applied to Yale and went to Yale in 1960. That was kind of lonely. And Sandy and I were married 3 months later. So we were married in just before Christmas in 1960. That seemed to work out. She got a job at Yale's hospital, then known as Grace New Haven. And I was taking courses and working and working and working. It was only about a year after we were married that an interesting topic came up for discussion, and that was religion. And that's going to be a theme, following the chemistry theme. We talked about religion. I had been raised in a Jewish family. Her family went to the Methodist Church. Neither of us wanted to follow that path. There was nothing that we could both buy into. and we thought it was very important to both buy in. So what we decided was we didn't have to make a decision unless we had a child. And at that point, we would have to make a decision because we agreed we wanted a child to have some sort of religious education foundation. And the one rule we had that when we made that decision, it had to be something that we both could buy into. We did not want to drop a child off for Bible study or RE and drive away. We wanted our child to see us participate, stay and attend service, and buy in to whatever it is they were learning in church school. So that was the rule. And we deferred the decision. That worked until 1963. Now, one of the things that struck me by the Elder Tree presentations is 1963 was a big year for our generation, and no one's mentioned it. Well, for us, it started off pretty good because on February 15th, 1963, Beth was born. And that was pretty neat. One fallout from that was when Sandy was very pregnant, she had to stop work. And after Beth came, we found out that Sandy was earning much more than I was, as with a graduate stipend. And a graduate stipend won't feed 2 adults and 1 child. So when Beth was 6 weeks old, Sandy went back to work, found a half-day nursing job that was really great. And that was actually pretty good because I had the mornings free. Sandy went to work and I took care of Beth and had started writing my thesis. And that was really fun. That was really special. Towards the end of 1963, November 22nd, John Kennedy was assassinated. That was really our first 9/11. It really hit us and disturbed us. And as 63 ended and 1964 started, we wanted to be with people who were hurting like we were hurting. Oh, let me back up 6 months. We're a little bit 62. Somewhere in late 62, early 63, there was an ad in the New York Times magazine, Sunday magazine, from the Unitarian Association. It was an ad. Write us, we'll tell you more. No Google, no website. Back then you had to actually paper and pencil, write it out. So we sent them a thing and they sent back some reading material. So we had read this probably before Beth was born. We knew something. Okay. So then after Kennedy's assassination and we felt we wanted something, we remembered the ad and the stuff that had come in the mail, and we looked in the phone book. Back then we had phone books. We didn't have directories online. And there was a Unitarian church in New Haven. So one Sunday we packed our daughter up and went off to Unitarian Church of New Haven. And we walked in and there were people who were happy to see us. Go figure. They showed us, they took us to childcare, showed us that they seemed like they could take good care of our baby. They had a crib and all sorts of stuff. And we went to service. The minister was Wayne Chatty, and he was brilliant. And by the end of the service, we knew we were home. So we've been members of a Unitarian church since 1964. We went every Sunday. Back then, Unitarian churches didn't open for the summer. Finished my thesis, went off to a postdoc at Brown in the chemistry department, and we moved to Providence. And for first Sunday, and we were there, looked in the phone book and found the Unitarian church and went to the Unitarian Church of Providence, which the sermons weren't up to New Haven, but this was the civil rights era and the church was in the right place. 65, Eric was born. I mainly that day remember how much snow there was. He was born January 15th. 22nd. You can erase that from the video. Following year, 66, I was finishing up my 2-year postdoc and went looking for a job and interviewed in the microbiology department in Rochester, and it seemed like an interesting fit. And so in 66, we moved here, figuring we'd be here about 3 years and then move on. Stayed at the university for 35 years until I retired in 2001. First, again, phone book, Unitarian Church, closed in the summer. Right after Labor Day, we went to church. It was a good service. Don't remember who the minister was. The end of the service, 2 ladies came up to us, Eleanor Porter and Ruth Coakley. And they said, "You're young parents. How about teaching RE?" And I assume Sandy said yes. I cannot believe I would have said yes. But we taught RE for a number of years after that, and did not go to church during those years. We came in and went upstairs to teach. We taught a lot of parents, kids whose parents are part of Elder Tree. Bob West left, and we said, geez, we had this famous minister and we never heard him preach. We've got to go to church. So we stopped RE. We had this redheaded kid with a crew cut, and that was Dick Gilbert. Over the years between us, we've done a lot of things in church. We tutored. In the early years, Sandy and Eleanor Porter used to do a church dinner for 200. Some of you may remember Joyce Gilbert's cookbook, Cooking for 50. You only have to multiply by 4, and Ralph Porter and I used to do the setup for it. Interesting stuff. I was on the board for a while. As part of that, I was asked to look at the denomination was starting with interns. I was asked to look into that. I got John Olson to help me, and we contacted churches that had interns, decided that was good. We thought it was like the idea of First Unitarian being a teaching church. And so John and I put together an intern program, sold the board on it, and then sold the congregation. And Marty, whose name I'm blocking on, was our first intern, and Khaki McTeague was our second. We started out pretty good. Sandy was on Khaki's intern committee. Let's see, I've been church moderator, and I spent some years on finance. Okay. Spent 35 years at the university, did lots of research, lots of grant applications, lots of writing, lots of travel to give seminars. In the early days, some of the early times we took the kids with us after they were through high school. Sandy's done a lot of traveling with me. We've probably been through most countries in Western Europe. We've been to, thinking around the globe, we've been to Israel and Jordan. We've been to Japan a couple times, China, Australia, New Zealand. Been interesting. And then you can't be around for 35 years in academics without being on a lot of committees. I was on the faculty senate at U of R for a few terms, and at one point was president of the Senate, which gave me a chance to fight with Bob Sproul. I think I'll just leave that. It was like being a lion tamer in a very bad circus. One of the more interesting committees I was on was the International Committee on Virus Taxonomy. As its name says, it's an international committee, and it's the where all the information on viruses around the world are collected, and where viruses are named. And naming viruses turns out to be a political job, which I think none of us appreciated until politicians tried to tell us how to name viruses. We would never have called anything a Wuhan virus or a China virus. Geographic names were absolutely forbidden. And that was I learned a lot being on that committee, so I knew what coronaviruses were decades ago. Okay. Along with that, we did 2 sabbaticals, just briefly, both in England. The first one was in '72, and we took the kids because it would have been child abuse to leave them behind. They went into the 2nd and 4th grades in England. The school was a progressive school. They thought, the locals thought Americans would like it. We did. It was kind of like a Montessori school. And it was just, the school rooms were exciting to go in, and the kids had a ball. About the 2nd or 3rd week of school, we're sitting down to dinner, and Beth says, "We had religion today in school." And it occurred to me that these blokes have a state religion. And so I said, oh, tell us about it. And it turns out it was pretty much 15 minutes of reading a Bible story. It wasn't propaganda type stuff. It was just reading a Bible story to kids. So I said to them, okay. I could tell Beth had brought this up because she wanted to see my reaction. I said, look, if you'd like, I'll go speak to the headmistress and have you excused from class during that time, or you can stay and listen. But if you stay and listen, you cannot argue. No rebutting what is being read. Now, these kids have been through our church school for a couple of years. So both kids said, oh no, this is much too interesting. We want to stay and listen. I said, okay, you can stay, but you have to be quiet. And so as the year went along, we could tell when they had religion because we'd be sitting down to dinner and they'd both start giggling. And one of them would say, you'll never guess what she said today. So for a year, we got to talk religion with our kids. Interesting bonus of the sabbatical year. When the kids were grown, Beth was working in England, in Boston. Eric was in graduate school in Colorado. We did our second sabbatical and went back to England, this time to Cambridge, where I was at the Medical Research Council labs. And we were wondering where we were going. Cambridge is an Elizabethan town, Elizabeth I. Cambridge University was started in 1209. So we were thinking about where can we live? And a friend found out that we were coming and took some steps without us knowing anything about it. And I got a call telling me I had been elected a fellow at Christ College in Cambridge. And that going, and they would supply housing. In fact, our house right next to the college was on the first map of Cambridge. And the first map of Cambridge was drawn in 1570. While I went off to do research during the day, Sandy walked across town to Cavendish College, a women's college. Cambridge colleges historically were all male. They did not recognize the existence of women. And having known some of these people, I don't think they knew where babies came from. But, so the women's colleges are outside of Cambridge itself. They were not allowed in the city. So Sandy went out to Cavendish College, a women's college, and I don't know how she talked them into letting her in as a student. Her student ID card said mature student. So I've always thought of her as a mature student. And she also talked them into letting her take the curriculum of the first year anthropology students. So she spent a year going to classes. Later, when we got back, turned that into working as a conservator at the Science Museum and other local museums. All right. Story I want on the church. Another town, another phone book, Unitarian Church. Unitarian Church of Cambridge I came to love. And it wasn't the church, it was the people. The theology, I guess I would consider Unitarian Christianity. We heard God and Jesus and that sort of stuff. The services were not terribly stimulating. The people were. These were people who, it's an older congregation, they would fit into Elder Tree. They had lived interesting lives. They had done good works. They were you just wanted to spend time with them. About our second or third week there, during coffee hour after church, I said to a group, because we always got a scrum talking, you know, this isn't fair. You all know our names, but we don't know any of your names. They're just all you people. In the United States, our church, we all have name tags. And there's either, in the lobby, there's either board with the tags or table with the name tags. And I hope I haven't hurt anybody's feelings. The next week, we walked into the lobby, and there's a table, and it's name tags for all the members and for us. And that is why I love those people. Last thing, we've had a big, we spent 15 years tutoring on the Navajo reservation. Another story, great experience, very different than tutoring schools here. Very different children, very different teachers. The teachers are all Navajo. And we learned a lot. So, as I said at the start, I figure we're lost, but we're making good time. Thank you.